To start off these things with a fun question, depending on what you think is fun. So you ready to get started?
Let's do it.
All right. So my fun question is that looking back on hindsight with the merger, I'm sure there is a bunch of things you would want to do differently, like we all would when looking back at something. But if you had to pick one thing that you would have done differently, what would that be?
This is a hard question, actually, because a merger is so complex that if you would change one thing, it's like if you would change one thing in your life, what would it be? Well, I don't know, because like so many other things would change. So it's a little bit like that, but still there is, I think, if I'd have to pick one thing, it'd probably be that we picked like one date for like the grand launch of our new combined platform.
Mhm.
And we set that pretty far in advance, but still it was like this big moment we were working towards. And if I'd have to do it again, I know there's pros and cons to each approach, but I think some of the pains we've had through this approach, we could have avoided by going a bit more gradual and like not having that big splash at one moment.
Mm-hmm.
That of course comes with other cons. So I don't know what that scenario would have looked like, but I think that'd be the one I go for. Yeah. So I want to make sure that I frame this the right way, because both the companies that we joined, so we merged Leadfeeder and EchoBot to create Dealfront, right?
Mm-hmm.
And both companies had data and were by themselves data driven, but by putting the two of them together, we lost some of that. And I think that's kind of why I thought this would be an interesting thing to talk about, because that's not that common, right?
Mm-hmm.
So as we put two companies together and truly made it one platform, we also needed to merge where our reporting happened and user tracking and all those kinds of things. Now on EchoBot, we were using Kibana. On Leadfeeder, we had the data in Tableau, or like in a data warehouse there. And we decided to pick that infrastructure going forward. But that meant that, like, for example, when we moved things over from Kibana to the data warehouse and the reporting environment we had there, we ran into a few issues. One, it wasn't that easy to get the history in, so we lost a lot of the history. Second, and especially if you're thinking about details, right? So if you we have our target solution allows you to search the market, find companies that you want to engage with, and so you can do different searches, very complex searches there. And we would have the data in there, like what kind of searches are people doing? Are they just looking for industry employee size, or are they searching the website of this company, right? And that data we just didn't have for a while anymore. So we lost some insight in how people were using our products. Now, you could think maybe not that much changed during that time, but of course you never want to have a data gap like that. You don't want to get caught by surprise, right? So that was one part. And the other part was that the way that the reports in Tableau were being created was that we had analysts who would do that, right? So almost every new insight into data, even if you just want to pull like a one-off report, would be a request. You would have to ask someone to do that for you. So it wasn't self-serve, simply said, right? And that was one of the big improvements we made, was that we then introduced another solution where we could have more self-serve reporting. So we still have Tableau for the kind of confirmed company KPI reporting, the things that everybody should have access to.
Right.
And then we're using at this moment Metabase for where anyone who has access and knows how to work with it can go in, pull
their reports.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we are using Metabase as well, and that makes sense. So maybe a follow-up question here is that time where it was kind of like a dark spot of like missing this data for this certain time, did that create any like delays, or did it affect anything for go-to-market, or like what happened during that time?
I think the main way how it affected, and that was of course only one example, right? And it happened across multiple places. The main way it affected is that we just weren't aware of certain things that were happening, right? And we just didn't have insight. And if it's like, I don't remember what the exact saying is, but if it's something around like if it's not tracked, it's not done, right?
Yes. Yes.
And so that, right? So it
Right.
means there were no numbers, so there was no focus on certain
Mm-hmm.
things because we couldn't say how it was doing. We could just do a qualitative assessment. Of course, if we would see or if we'd hear from a customer that something required attention, we would of course action that. But we wouldn't have like the the quantitative data across thousands of customers. Like, hey, how is this performing right now?
Yeah.
I think that is a big that was a big problem actually, to not have certain metrics for a while that we knew previously were important to us. And
Right.
another, sorry,
No, go ahead. No.
another thing that happened, which might be an interesting example, is one of the metrics that we look a lot at the lead feeder side is if people are installing the tracker, right? So lead feeder identifies the companies on your website. So you need to install the tracker, else we cannot do anything for you.
Right.
So it's a core metric. Like if that doesn't happen, nothing else happens after
Right.
that.
Right.
And when we launched the platform, it just plummeted. Like it just like, and we made a few changes. We thought they were minor. Apparently they were not, right? And in the sign up process, and people just out of a few step process, suddenly they just weren't getting there anymore. And we had even a sales assist motion on that. So actually we had salespeople that would reach out, hey, can I help you with anything? And even like just like very bad. Like it really, like I think I don't remember the exact number, but it was like less than a third of what it was before that. So, and that took us a really long time to figure out what had happened there. And that was not because we didn't have the data, because actually we did. But so many things had changed, so many little things, that we didn't know anymore what had caused
Yeah.
this drop, right? And it was and it turned out to be like the different brand we showed at the top of the website that confused people, like this really small funny thing that you didn't even think of during a product release, right? And that that was quite a journey to find out what was causing that. It took us much longer than we thought it would. So for a long period of time, the main way that we would do that if we didn't have the data would be to talk with customer success, because that's those are the people that are talking with customers all day, and we would use it to prioritize where we should put our focus. And also, if we would have new ideas or we wanted to change something, we would check there like, hey, instead of running an A/B test or something like that, we would say, hey, this is the plan. What do you think? Are there any customers we can talk with? Things like that. So yeah, for a long period of time, CS. Then that's a good thing to do regardless, even if you have data. I think it should always be part of the routine. But only by itself, it also gives you a too biased view, is what we learned at some point, right? So you do want to have your own data reference points, because else logically there's a lot more recency bias, right? If people run into an issue a lot in the last 2 weeks, then that is the issue they're going to refer to when something happens, when they're asked, right? Whereas if you maybe look at the last 4 months, there might have been like bigger problems that we should be looking at. And that's the balance kind of. In the end, you'd want to solve both problems, right? But still, that's I think after we had done that for a while, we realized the next iteration for the parts, because there's parts where we're just not always going to have all the data, or we don't have enough customers to get to quantitative data, right? For some of our higher tier products. And there we still need to rely on that, and we need to kind of find the right combination there. So generally, we want to have what you could call a beta release first, and we'd want to have it in the hands of a few customers. So our rollout process is that we first we check within R&D behind the feature flag that everything works. Then if we're happy, we give it to the rest of the organization. Then if we're happy, we want to get, if it's a bigger release, we want to get 10 to 20 customers. Usually you invite 20 and up to 10 do it. You want to get them to try it and to give feedback. And that's also to make sure that everything works properly, right? Because the product-led philosophy is a big part of how we work. That means usage first, things need to be intuitive and they need to work, right? So yeah, so that's really a necessity that we have this kind of process. If releases are smaller, we might just push something out, but anything that's a major change, yeah. And specifically in the last year, like with many companies, we've been heavily focused on retention. Like, how can we make the user experience better? How can we just like be customer obsessed and focus the problems that they're having and getting them to value with the things that we have, instead of just like releasing a bunch of new stuff that they didn't ask for.
Exactly.
And so with that, what we then did is we focused on the customers that were suffering the most from the issue we were solving, right? So usually we had a list somewhere of like, well, these customers are doing such big searches that sometimes they have some latency issues. Okay, we have some new solution. Well, let's test it with them, of course, right? And okay, that problem is now solved. Now, okay, what is the so that's but that's again collaboration with CS.
Right, yeah. Right. Yeah. So aside, because I know like your CS team is constantly speaking to the customers, and that's their main task and they're at the forefront. But we're always talking in this space, especially at our team, about always checking in with our customers. We want to hear from them all the time, but sometimes it's not that easy. So how often do you think, like, ideally you would want to speak to your customers, and like how you find that, balance between, okay, yes, like you have some confidence in what your product vision is going to be, and based on where the company is going, also with like market research, competitive research, but then also, like you said, like making sure that you aligned with what your customers need. But sometimes you do need to find that balance, and it's not just if they say this then you jump on that. There's a whole process of validating whether or not this is absolutely needed, and it goes in the right direction that will affect more than a handful of users.
Absolutely. I found this to be very hard to get right, but it's super important. So also in previous roles, it's easy not to talk with customers, to be busy with the day-to-day and so on. And we, especially during the merger, this happened at some point. Like, we just had to get so many things done that we just focused on that. Luckily, that's behind us now for a while already, and we really had to reignite that. So we had to actually set up a project for this and say, listen, everybody in product needs to be talking with customers a number of times per, well, it depends. We have some people that build internal products or like systems, others true customer facing with thousands of customers. So depending on those, there might be a different frequency, but it needs to be frequent, right? So, and in our company, we feel it's kind of the same actually for C-suite, for example. Like, if C-suite doesn't talk with customers, then how do we know what direction to go? And of course, this is super subjective, typically, in terms of what kind of input you get. Like the types of customers I talk with, those are often the more advanced use cases. They might want to do things with parts of the product that we are now releasing or developing, because that's the part where I can add the most value, and also where I can get the best input on if we're going the right direction. So you cannot just say, oh, this is what all our customers need. It's not like there is definitely a bias, but what I get from it is the little details. It's the little things, because the big vision always sounds nice. You just do this thing. It's like, we just push the data from there, and then they can run campaigns and it'll all be great. And they say, yeah, that's great, but I can't use it because I cannot match it with this field that I have in my CRM, which I need. Like, okay, like, well, then let's add it, right? Because it's actually not complicated, but without it, customers can't use it, right? So it's these kind of things that, that they're often the things I get out of it is not, we need this new feature. It's this little tweaks, little things that we need to add, but they tie it all together to make it actually valuable.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. Like, being a company that's just like, oh, here's a brand new shiny feature, instead of just really focusing back on the use case and understanding, like, does that add value to it, like real value, or is this like a nice to have? And if it's adding real value and you believe that, then are the customers able to adopt it? So and that comes to all of like speaking with them, testing, making sure, like validating if this is actually what they expected when you first kind of sold the idea of what you're creating. And I think that's like Because then otherwise the customer's just like, okay, yeah, I don't like this. I'm going to go back to my usual way of doing this task that you were trying to improve to them.
That's right. Yeah, it's about delivering that value, but also making it really easy for people to adopt your tool, right? So if people have to proactively come back every time to get value, you're going to lose, at least half of the people you could have else kept with you. Whereas if you integrate into their systems and you figure out some way of pushing data there or informing them, suddenly they get reminded, right? They're like, oh yeah, of course, I did like this. I just forgot about it because I have 100 other things to do, right?
Right, right.
So it's like that integration in the day-to-day, whichever way that happens is super important, aside from the thing actually just providing value. You want to avoid changing the whole system of the company. You want something quickly, right? And one of the ways we even had this at some point, even though we had Tableau and Metabase, we still felt in product that we needed fast. We had a more urgent requirement of getting new tracking in place on things. And you can use something like those, in-app products. Maybe UserSnap can also do some of these things. We're using User Pilot, for example, where for in-app messaging, but we realized, it also has product analytics. So I can actually, by myself, without having to ask an engineer or nothing, I can click things and I want to know if someone clicks here, then I want to track that. If someone clicks there, I want to track that. And we use that for stuff we want to track quickly. If we just want to, and that's not our long-term reporting for the company or like the things that we share with other teams, but that is giving us as product what we need to at least know if something's working or if people are using it or which customers used it and things like that. And just that kind of information is really valuable, especially if you can combine that with session recordings where you can just see what people are doing. Because just seeing what people are doing is, especially at that stage, so much more valuable than some data points that you still have to validate and so on. So those are probably the two things I would look at because they're quick to implement, fairly easy, and they don't require a lot of backend work. They're pretty much like you just get the script in, similar to how you do with your solution, and then it just works, right?